I was in a seminar not too long ago. It was on a university campus. A young man came walking down the aisle after I'd finished up. He was shaking his finger at me, and he said, "It could have happened." I said, "Whoa, time out, what could have happened?" He went on to say, the fish, they could have walked out onto the land. I smiled at him. I said, "Yeah, he'd have to have a mate evolving with him at exactly the same time, same rate."
Says who? Why is it a requirement for animals to have a mate that is evolving at exactly the same rate? It is too bad that the student Harrub was talking about was unable to present him with some rudimentary facts regarding the variety of ways in which biological reproduction may occur. So far, Harrub and similar creationists are the only ones who I have ever encountered who struggle with this non-existent dilemma. Apparently, Harrub's understanding of animal reproduction is limited to sexual means, but he needs to get his mind out of the gutter. This is not needed for the propagation of every species. And no, I am not getting cheap and only referring to the countless microorganisms who need little more than favorable homeostasis in order to undergo mitosis. I am talking about insects and fish, as well as the amphibian and reptilian tetrapods to whom we humans and other mammals are irrefutably related, as we fall under the same superclass. It has been seen in nature time and time again that having a mate is not an inescapable requirement for animals to multiply. Many have accomplished this feat just fine. It seems like Harrub has never heard of or studied parthenogenesis. Parthenogenesis is a form of asexual reproduction, and it occurs in a number of different ways in vertebrates and invertebrates alike. One version of this is what is called facultative parthenogenesis. This is when a species that will typically engage in sexual reproduction will revert to asexual reproduction. This is thought to occur when viable males are scarce, or when conditions are such that they favor a rapid growth in a certain population. This form of parthenogenesis is not unique to animals that lay eggs either. Bonnethead and Atlantic blacktip sharks in captivity have given birth to pups that did not possess any genetic material from a fathering male. Also, there is obligate parthenogenesis, which is when organisms reproduce strictly by asexual means, either for one or multiple generations. The offspring is basically given a full set of genes from the mother, which pretty much phases out the need for the male to volunteer their sperm to the endeavor. Some species are unisex, with all of the individuals being of the female gender, a little rare amongst vertebrates, but they do exist. Nemedophorus neomexicanus, one of the common New Mexican whiptails, have no problem getting by without a member of the opposite sex, and fertilization from a male is not needed. They do exhibit rock-mounting behaviors, though, with the lizards taking turns playing the role of the male, but this is done to assist in ovulation by playing off of the lizard's natural hormone cycle. The sexual stimuli, though an added bonus, is not required for their reproduction. However, the members of this species that do engage in this mating ritual have a higher reproductive success rate than those kept in isolation. Sweet, leapin' lesbian lizards! Harrub should really look into these parthenogenetic animals. They're pretty interesting. Parthenogenesis has been known about since the 18th century, so he really has no excuse to not be brought up to speed, especially if he is going to make comments such as this.
He'd have to have a mate evolving with him at exactly the same time, same rate.
One may ask, well, how would we know that parthenogenesis was actually a factor with primitive life? Maybe Harrub has a point in saying that these animals crawling out of the water would need a mate. Well, let's consider the recurring details that accompany animal reproduction, such as egg-laying and live birth, things of that nature, which have changed very little in the hundreds of millions of years. Paleontologists were for the most part in agreement that dinosaurs laid eggs, well before the first fossilized nests were uncovered. and the skeletal structures of prehistoric mammals clearly indicate that they were equipped for live birth. These forms of gestation, incubation, and delivery became an established trend very early on in the kingdom of Animalia. There isn't a reason to accept the existence of a package and then turn around and question the existence of the vehicle used to bring it to your doorstep. Asexual reproduction fits just as cozily into the theory of evolution as sexual reproduction, and there is no need to go through and reevaluate one of the most common ways that a parent's genetics may be transferred to the offspring after it has been painfully examined, documented, and reviewed, and observed over and over again for the last 200 years. To put it simply, life has a way of taking the path of least resistance when it comes to the preservation of the gene. This all goes without even saying that a single organism in the course of its lifetime isn't always confined to one particular gender. I wish Harrub would realize that life can be full of awesome surprises if you take the time to actually study it and find them. Or hell, even take the time to watch a great movie that is loosely based on scientific fact. Let's allow Dr. Grant to explain.
Now, some West African frogs have been known to spontaneously change sex from male to female in a single-sex environment. Malcolm was right. Look. Life found a way.
Now think about that for just a moment. It's not good enough for just one fish to mutate and to get up on land. You've got to have a male and a female. I then smiled a little bit further. I looked at him in the eye. I said, yeah, and he'd have to do it in about 3 minutes because that seagull that's flying around over his head, he's looking at lunch.
Now Harrub thinks that an animal's inability to avoid predation while trying to do the hibbity-bibbity during the water-to-land shift is somehow a shortcoming of the theory of evolution. Well, there were predators in the water too, Harrub. The majority of species have natural predators, and there is no getting around it. Aside from that nonsense, he seems fascinated with the thought of sex on the beach, when there are plenty of species that occasionally take to land who will have sexual intercourse in water. This is little more than preference and contemporary mating behaviors. Even we can have successful coupling while submerged. Just ask Jacuzzi Jessica. This entire rant was just another one of Harrub's bizarre assertions of belief that reeks of scientific illiteracy.
Physiologically, what would have had to have happened to allow a fish to go from an aqueous environment to a land environment? I told him, I said, I'll tell you what, I'm going to give you the respiratory system. We're going to say this fish had both gills and lungs. Now, physiologically, that's pretty much impossible, but we're going to say that's what happened.
Well, except for the lungfish. When it comes out of the water after using its gills, and then uses its lung to breathe.
So what else would it need? He began to suggest some things. I suggested some things. We talked about the fact he'd have to lose scales very quickly.
They would have to lose scales pretty quickly, huh? Well, let's take a look at some animals that live on land who do possess scales. Okay. He most likely misspoke. By scales, he probably meant gills. So let's look at some animals who take to land and have gills, some of which don't necessarily require lungs. Let's see just how unlimited and surprising Mother Nature can be. If you haven't already noticed, Harrub is trying to establish false parameters and place stupid stipulations on what would need to occur in order for evolution to take place. For the sake of time, let's invent our own word. Let's combine the words stupid and stipulation to expediently label the bogus limitations and disinformation that Harrub has placed on evolution in a feeble attempt to contradict the theory. Let's call them stupidulations. Mammals found living with dinosaurs does not fit the evolutionary timeline. Prehistoric animals still living would need to have noticeably changed in appearance. Life crawling from the ocean would need gills and lungs. Animals require a mate evolving at the same time to propagate, and there was a need to perform coitus on land when life was transitioning from the oceans, are all stupidulations, put forth with the intent to turn the uneducated away from the theory of evolution.